China, being a victor nation, has the absolute full right to strike at Japan to prevent the rise of Japanese militarism or neo-Japanese fascism, period. That's carved in the United Nations Charter. If you read the enemy state clause, it specifically clarifies China's right to use unilateral military might against Japan to prevent Japan from constituting another military threat against China, especially if Japan dares to arm itself with nuclear weapons. I've declared on many occasions, the moment Japan possesses nuclear weapon will be the moment of the annihilation of Japan as a state. Period. No politician, including Prime Minister Takaichi, should indulge in fantasy.
全网炸裂的顶级兑现来了。高志凯教授海外节目当众贴脸硬刚日本右翼，放出震惊全球的终极红线警告：日本一旦拥有核武器，就是整个日本国家彻底毁灭的时刻。没有模糊话术，没有外交缓冲，全程法理加历史双重碾压，直接撕碎日本军事化扩张的幻想。西方学者当场紧急反驳对冲，这场博弈对话道尽中日百年无法化解的地缘死结。
There's some breaking news that we have to start with. A little bit off topic, but maybe not so much. Reuters has just reported, and what they're reporting is that Iran is very close to a deal with China to purchase anti-ship cruise missiles. This, of course, is just as the United States is getting ready to deploy a vast naval force, or already has, to the Iranian coast ahead of a possible attack on Iran. It's a little off topic, but Victor, would you comment on this for us? Because we're talking about Chinese, they're called CM-302 missiles, described as supersonic missiles. They have a range of about 300,000 kilometers. They're designed to evade shipborne defenses they go really low down to almost the surface of the water and then can rise again. Did I say something? 300, yes, kilometers. Victor, what do you make of this? What should we think of this? What does it say?
Thank you very much. Both China and Iran are two fully independent countries with their sovereignty. And there is no international law which prohibits China and Iran to engage with each other in commercial transactions. And China happens to produce some of the most sophisticated missiles of all kinds. And it's absolutely right for China and Iran to size up each other and engage in whatever economic and commercial transactions they desire to do that, including involving such military missiles. And I think the whole world should be put on notice that both China and Iran will have full sovereign right to do such commercial transactions with each other, and no country should pretend to be surprised.
But given the timing of what's going on right now, those sound a little bit like fighting words. Pascal, you want to take this?
I mean, to me, this sounds very much like China is sending a very, very clear message, which is that if there will be a war, it will certainly be a missile war, right? The way that we've seen it in June last year during the 12th Day War. That was not fought with boots on the ground. It was not fought with ships on the sea. It was fought with the missiles that were flying over these other countries. This time, if the United States intervenes, of course, there are going to be missiles on the sea. But there are going to be ships on the sea, but those ships are going to be just as vulnerable to missiles. And China just made it very clear that if the missile war happens, and if it takes quite a bit of time, like the Ukraine war, if it's not done within a couple of weeks, then Chinese missiles will be ready to be supplied. So it's not just the Iranian capacity to produce missiles, it's also the capacity of China to supply them. And, this will take time. Operating these missiles will take time, but the signal, the political signal is very clear.
Yeah, so that's the point, Victor. I mean, is China using this moment on the brink of what could be an attack on Iran by the United States to send a message to the United States with this announcement right now? I mean, if they'd said this a year ago, nobody would have even paid attention, but it matters now, no?
Well, it is clear to everyone in the world in decency that Iran is not threatening the United States with war or military confrontation. It is just the opposite. The United States is threatening war against Iran, coupled with Israel. Therefore, let's really clarify who is at fault, who is not at fault. Iran is not threatening war against the United States. It's the United States threatening war against Iran. So how can you say, now that Iran is being threatened with war and military confrontation by the United States, therefore you should not export missiles to Iran? It's just the opposite. The United States should stop threatening Iran with war and engage with Iran in peace, rather than in such military jingoism.
Speaking of the United States, they're certainly very much involved militaristically with Japan of late. And there seems to be this charge that we heard at the Munich summit just a little while ago that Japan seems to be over-militarizing itself, and China is sending them this message that you heard just a little while ago in no uncertain terms. Does China have a point, Pascal, when it makes that warning to Japan?
Yes, it does. I mean, China clearly has very, very bad memories of Japan, and we must never forget all of the crimes that were committed in China, mainland China in the north, the millions of people who died during the 15-year war, 1931 to 1945. And we must not underestimate just the sheer emotions that any form of Japanese militarism invokes in China. On the other hand, when we try to understand what recently happened, we also must keep in mind that what Prime Minister Takaichi said was clearly a breach of protocol. It was clearly something that even Mr. Abe before her, the long-serving right-wing prime minister, never actually said. And she did so, but she did in the context of being questioned by the opposition party. I still interpret it as a slip of the tongue. Not that she didn't think so, she does, but that she said so was clearly unwise. But it kind of unleashed a box of Pandora on, especially because in China, this cannot be interpreted in any other way.
Are you convinced, Victor, that the Japanese are in fact militarizing to a dangerous or threatening level?
Let me really go to the jugular of this issue. I think what Prime Minister Takaichi did and said in recent weeks and months is tantamount to Japan's attempt to deny the ironclad verdict of Japan's unconditional surrender to China and other allied countries, including the United States and the former Soviet Union and the United Kingdom, because Japan unconditionally surrendered. And there are terms for Japan never to constitute another military threat against China. Otherwise, they will be in breach of their unconditional surrender terms, and China, being a victor nation, has the absolute full right to strike at Japan to prevent the rise of Japanese militarism or neo-Japanese fascism, period. That's carved in the United Nations Charter. If you read the enemy state clause, it's specifically clarifies China's right to use unilateral military might against Japan to prevent Japan from constituting another military threat against China, especially if Japan dares to arm itself with nuclear weapons. I've declared on many occasions, the moment Japan possesses nuclear weapon will be the moment of the annihilation of Japan as a state. Period. No politician, including Prime Minister Takaichi, should indulge in fantasy that they could be allowed to militarily arm itself to constitute another threat or to threaten war against China, which is a victor nation. And Japan is the unconditionally surrendering country back in 1945. We should keep this in historical perspective, and mankind as a whole should unite to deny Japan any chance of remilitarization and constituting another militaristic or fascist threat to China. China lost 35 million of our countrymen at the hands of the Japanese militarists. Should anyone really expect that China should allow the re-rise of Japanese militarism and new Japanese fascism? No way. Prime Minister Takashiki, wake up from your fantasy. You should never be allowed to rearm yourself to constitute another threat to China or to Russia or to Korea, for example, or to the United States, because we all need to remember Pearl Harbor. Never forget Pearl Harbor.
Victor, those are really strong words. I just want to make sure I heard you clearly, because I think what you just said will likely make news. You're saying China has the preemptive right to strike Japan, and not only has the right to do so, but will do so if it feels that Japan is over-militarizing. Is that what you say?
Absolutely. That's authorized in the United Nations Charter regarding the enemy state clause. It is specifically stipulated that the enemy state, which includes Japan, if they dare to rearm itself to constitute a military threat against a victor nation, which includes China, then the victor nation has the right to use preemptive military might to prevent that remilitarization or new Japanese fascism from raising its dangerous head. It's carved in stone. It's part of the international order that we are living through. So no one in the world should pretend that they are ignorant of this enemy state clause contained very secretly in the United Nations Charter.
Just one final question so people can understand what you're saying. Is the threshold for a preemptive strike the determination that Japan has some kind of nuclear weaponry capability, or something shy of that?
Well, as I mentioned, the moment Japan possesses the nuclear weapon will be the moment of the annihilation of Japan as a state, period. Now, before then, if Japan tried to arm itself with other weapons of mass destruction and to constitute a military threat or to threaten to use war against China, these all may be considered as sufficient for triggering the enemy state clause in the United Nations Charter. Therefore, I just hope Prime Minister Takaichi will not really pretend to be ignorant of the enemy state clause in the United Nations Charter, and she should not be allowed to turn every inch of the land in Japan into a battleground and push the 120 million Japanese people into the abyss of war again. Japan suffered hugely at the hands of the Japanese fascism before they unconditionally surrendered in 1945. They should never be allowed to be pushed again into the abyss of war or threat of war or aggression against China.
Pascal, what do you make of that, and what do you think the Prime Minister will do?
I think I must just disagree with the language before. We must understand, like, there's a big difference between fascist militarism on the one hand and a security dilemma on the other hand. And language that just was used will only lead to one thing, which is that the Japanese will feel more threatened. As I said in the beginning, we must not forget the 35 million, as you correctly said, dead during the Second World War. But if anyone currently says Japan will be annihilated with nuclear weapons, all this will do is push Japan to think about how to arm itself more. So what is needed at the moment is really words of reassurance and understanding in order not to land in a security dilemma. So there are moments when countries go full-blown fascist and just want to conquer. There are moments when countries land in mutual fear of each other. And Japan is not just afraid of China, Japan is also very much afraid of the nukes of North Korea. Japan so far does not seek nuclear weapons, it seeks the ability to deter those. That in and of itself is not so much of a wise thing to do, because deterrence leaves out the ability to have friends, right? friendship is the best defense against any form of attacks. So what we need to avoid at this point is really where both sides perceive each other as a mortal enemy, and words of will be destroyed, will be annihilated, and so on do not help in de-escalating a situation.
So what I hear you saying is that you think Victor should be less threatening, that he may have a point, but he shouldn't use such bombastic language. Do you take the point, Victor, or do you disagree? Are you threatening?
Absolutely not. There is only one person and one country which are threatening. That is Prime Minister Takaichi of Japan and the Japanese government, which want to go deeper and deeper into remilitarization, which may be considered as the remilitarization and the new Japanese fascism. And allow me to make this point again. Japan should never be allowed to constitute another military threat against China. And the moment they constitute a threat or to threaten to use war against China will trigger the enemy state clause in the United Nations Charter, enabling China to take unilateral military action to prevent the rearmament of Japan and the reappearance of Japanese fascism in Japan. And allow me to mention, this is not a threat. This is carved in stone. The moment Japan possesses nuclear weapon will be the annihilation of Japan as a state, period.
Yeah.
Prime Minister Takaichi, I hope you will listen to me.
Oh, I'm sure.
整场对话最大的认知反差与核心真相是温柔外交之下的绝对底线思维。很多人以为这番狠话是情绪威慑，实则是高志凯基于联合国宪章敌国条款的合法硬核表态。日本是二战无条件投降战败国，法理上永远禁止军事化，拥核复苏。中国手握合法先发制衡权。日本右翼频频试探突破防务底线，炒作拥核议题，不断篡改历史认知，扩张军备规模，完全是无视历史，无视战后国际秩序。而西方学者的反驳尽显双标西式逻辑，只谈当下安全困境，刻意回避日本军国主义侵略历史，回避战败国法理约束，一味纵容日本突破红线，搅动亚太局势。更关键的是，这不是口头恐吓，是写进国际法的既定规则，是战后70多年国际秩序的核心根基。核心总结：中国从不主动挑事，但3500万同胞的血泪历史、既定的国际法理红线绝不允许被践踏。日本敢踏破核武红线，等待他的没有博弈余地，